Good afternoon. Welcome to the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York for this special afternoon program, which we're absolutely delighted to be hosting. I'm Karin Taylor, Program Director of the General Society. This program today is part of our literature program, a part of the Labour, Literature and Landmark Spring 2015 lecture series. The Labour, Literature and Landmark lectures are supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. I don't know how many of you here today, this is maybe your first visit, so a very warm welcome to you. You will find information about the General Society on your seat. It's the blue and white postcard. You will also find some other literature programs that may be of special interest to you in a flyer that's also there. And I'd also like to particularly mention, because we have a book about the General Society and we're having a book launch on June the 3rd, and we'd like to warmly invite you all to attend. The space you're in this evening is the Library of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen. The history has the General Society has a distinguished history that includes a lecture series that goes back to 1837. We also have a tuition-free Mechanics Institute, a school in the trades, and of course we have the General Society Library, of which you're in at the moment. And the library itself was founded in 1820, and for any of you who might be interested in finding out more, you'll find a library brochure on the registration table at the front. Today's program features the independent press, McPherson and Company, and their latest publication, Every Father's Daughter. And here to explain how today's program will work and give you a little bit of background on the book, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the publisher of McPherson and Company, Bruce McPherson. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin, and thank you, General Society Library, for hosting this special event. This book is kind of a fluke. It came over the transom about 2 years ago in my email. The email address said evansville.edu. I didn't know who it was coming from, but it was clearly a university, and I happened to go to high school in Evansville, Indiana, so I had to open this one. And as I read it, I thought, this is not the sort of book I do. And as I thought about it, I thought, this could be a very good reason to do it. And I noticed I knew some of the authors involved in this anthology. And I say this isn't the sort of book I do because anthologies are notoriously difficult books to produce, and for a variety of reasons. But not least among them is the fact that it's very difficult to promote them. It's very difficult to get the authors together in one place. It's impossible in most cases. So that accounts for the reason that you're all here this afternoon, and in 7 other cities around the country simultaneously. And we're going to connect you all together very shortly, in about an hour. The first hour this evening is going to be devoted to 4 of the contributors. Phillip Lopate, who has provided the introduction, Melora Wolff, Lily Lopate, and Johanna Goodman. These were all authors, except for Phillip, with whom I was completely unfamiliar. Another of the reasons to do a book like this. But what we have are authors who have gone to their local independent bookstores or writers' centers, or in this case, a literary library, around the country. And I'll just mention what's going to happen. At 5 o'clock, we'll connect by Skype up on the screen with the other venues, and with the editor, Margaret McMullan, who will moderate a question and answer between the other authors and this group. We have Nancy McCabe and Bobby Ann Mason at Carmichael's Bookstore in Louisville, Jane Friedman at New Dominion Bookstore in Charlottesville, Jane Smiley at River House Books in Carmel, California, Antonya Nelson at Literati, my voice got louder, in Ann Arbor, Nancy Janechill at the Golden Notebook in Woodstock, Mako Yoshikawa at the Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, and Margaret McMullan, Jessica Woodruff, Barbara Shoup, and Susan Neville at Indie Reads Books in Indianapolis. Now, my job is almost finished. I'm just going to introduce Phillip Lopate to you, who will then become the MC for the presentations by the other authors. I first met Phillip, I think, in this library in about 1979. That's about right, when I knew of him as a poet. He's since become a novelist, a famous essayist, an editor, a distinguished man of letters. And it has been another one of the great pleasure of producing this book for us to become reacquainted at this vast remove in time and space, but not space, actually. And so I'll just mention, I'm not going to actually run down your many successes, Phillip. I'm going to simply introduce you to take it from here.
Thank you, Bruce. I am the one interloper in this parade, the male. The editor, Margaret McMullan, an old friend and colleague, asked me to write the introduction, and I said I'd be happy to. So I'm going to read from that introduction. What is it about the relationship between fathers and daughters that provokes so much exquisite tenderness, satisfying communion, longing for more, idealization from both ends, followed often, if not inevitably, by disappointment, hurt, and the need to understand and forgive, or to finger the guilt of not understanding and loving enough? The bar is set very high from the start. Fathers tend to find the young daughters infinitely cute, adorable, incarnating the essence of all that draws these men to the feminine, without the intimidating judgmental scrutiny and moral character of the adult women who are now their partners in parenting. Later, once these daughters reach adolescence and beyond, they may scrutinize their fathers in equally excruciating detail. Then, too, the fact that sexual release is out of the question between fathers and daughters, except in horrific circumstances, means there is no ceiling, no break on the romantic fondness that may develop between them, hence the ache that often accompanies the love. Our language has a word for being dotingly enamored of one's wife, uxorious, and a word for loving one's father, philopatric, but not, so far as I can tell, one for the love of fathers for their daughters. Speaking as a father of a daughter, I can testify that there may be no comparable affection as intense or all-consuming. That does not mean that I fail to note her flaws or can rise above irritation in the face of her intermittent panics, tantrums, or self-absorptions. It simply means that I adore her. Do fathers and daughters understand each other? Yes and no. We see from Shakespeare's greatest play, King Lear, that even the most loving filial loyalty may be misunderstood. Reading the superbly written, empathetic, insightful set of personal essays in this volume by daughters about their fathers, which run the gamut from portraits of successful businessmen and civic-minded heroes to shady con artists and failures, from the most patiently paternal to the most neglectful, I'm struck by the persistent note of missed connection. These father figures, even the most loving and devoted, often seem so strangely distant, so abstract and unreachable. Perhaps because I experience myself as perfectly ordinary and transparent on a day-to-day basis, including those moments when I interact with my daughter, I am flummoxed by the mystery and remoteness with which the fathers here seem to be imbued. As a father, put on the defensive, I am tempted to ask, paraphrasing Freud's famous question, what do these daughters want? Some of the distance may simply be accounted for by the differences between men and women, what used to be called, euphemistically or not, the battle of the sexes. Some of that distance may be ascribed to the generation gap. Many of the fathers described here belonged more to that generation that fought in World War II or the Korean War and came back home taciturn about their war experiences. It is noteworthy how often the fathers are characterized as movie star handsome, especially from the looking up angle of girlhood, and how many of these matinee idols subsequently took to drink. Meanwhile, their daughters were coming to consciousness in a different order. The world of their fathers is a bygone world, quaint and unquestioningly patriarchal. We are living in an era when some biologists and feminists speculate whether men will even be necessary in the future. The roles of men and women are mutating from the old rigid patterns, mostly for the good, but we may ask, what then is the role of fathers vis-a-vis daughters in our present culture? First, to be present, or in the case of divorced parents, present enough to offer another model of beingness to daughters than that of the mother. Of course, a girl can grow up into a confident young woman without a father or a male figure present, as we see for many children of single mothers and lesbian couples. Still, there is something to be said for the old-fashioned family pattern. The sensitive, alert girl child will know how to extract life lessons from even the most taciturn of fathers, be he the strong silent or weak silent type. The father may be a purveyor of cultural knowledge, like the Mozart-loving subjects who keep popping up in this anthology. The father often takes on a protective role, which the growing daughter may find comforting and reassuring until she doesn't. The father may also indulge his daughter more than his spouse might, or give her more freedom to take risks. Many mothers see the world outside the home as filled with predators and try to imbue their daughters with fine-tuned wariness. A father, himself a member of that dubious male species, and therefore less likely to indict his entire sex, may convey a more benign regard for life beyond the domestic sphere. Certainly for present generations of daughters, less so today, from previous generations of daughters, less so today, when women are accepted into more professions, the father was a bridge to that bigger world, and part of his glamour derived from access to those stimulating, if potentially more dangerous, environments. How many of the fathers described here, awkward and passive at home, suddenly sprung to life in their occupational milieus? I'm going to stop here because I don't want to take up all the time, and introduce you to our first reader, Johanna Goodman, who is a widely published essayist, writer, an alumni of University of Evansville, where she met the editor, Margaret, and her work has appeared in many publications and anthologies. Often she writes about travel, food, and sex. Johanna?
Well, thank you. I think I'm actually going to stand. I think the belt on my dress is too tight for me to sit and read this, so I'm going to have to stand. Okay. Thank you. I can see. 9 years ago, I am 27, and I am home in New Albany, Indiana, visiting with my family. There is a birthday party for one of my 7 siblings, and there are the usual hot dogs and paper plates and perspiring cans of soda. My mother has brought in a big bunch of brightly colored helium balloons as decoration. The morning after the party, I am up in my childhood bedroom, and when I look out the window, I see my dad standing in the front yard, alone in the quiet of a spring morning. The dewy grass is giving a sheen to his leather shoes, and he is holding the big bunch of balloons in his large hands. I watch as he struggles to carefully separate the strings, then he releases the balloons to the sky, one at a time. He stares at each one as it drifts up and away until it becomes just a tiny pinprick of color. It is a rather odd sight, the 6'5" grandfatherly figure clad in impeccable dress slacks and a sport coat, playing with a handful of children's balloons. Watching him, I feel something inside me twist tightly. I slip on some shoes and go outside to join him. When he sees me, he smiles a distracted smile. I like watching these balloons float away, Josie. We stand together and he releases the string on the last balloon. It drifts skyward, joining the other tiny dots of color in the sky. We watch silently as it sails up into the clouds, fading into the blue. It is a rare, quiet bit of togetherness for us and should be a sweet moment, but watching those balloons drift away fills me with a strange, anxious kind of melancholy. I don't like watching them go. When I'm 35, my dad is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The diagnosis isn't a surprise. He is 77, and I have seen the shift in him, his confusion with numbers and dates, the way he repeats stories within minutes of each other, sometimes transposing the names of people and places. And yet, when my oldest brother calls me with the news, it still feels improbable, as if my commanding, in-charge father would never allow such a thing to happen to his solid, intelligent mind. For a while, medication seems to slow things down, but then a full year later, it's undeniable that my dad is slowly coming uncoiled. It becomes the norm for him to appear wearing a shirt inside out or sporting 2 pairs of pajama pants beneath his dress slacks, even in the heat of August. I buy him a beeping gadget to help him locate his constantly misplaced glasses and keys. He loses the gadget. At 36, I am pregnant with my first child. When I talk on the phone to my dad, I can feel my baby rolling back and forth in my belly, his strong kicks and punches occasionally making the fabric of my dress hitch and jerk. I listen to my father struggle through the conversation, and I try to float, relaxed and easy, through his tide of tangled words. I rub at the patch of flesh over my flailing baby, and I try to imagine my dad holding my son as he did his other grandchildren, bouncing him gently on his knee, letting him teethe on his heavy silver wristwatch. As I watch my dad slowly lose bits and pieces of himself, I think about those long ago released balloons. I know the bright shades of my father are fading with each passing day. They are drifting further and further away from me, and I can feel myself scrabble to contain them, trying to grip the tangled strings of them tightly in my fists, struggling to somehow make them stay. He spent his life as a successful insurance salesman. This makes him sound staid and dull, but in reality, he has a big, playful personality. His large blue eyes perch above a smirking mouth, and as a younger man, he bears a striking resemblance to Chevy Chase. As he grows older, his features crack and curl, and he suddenly begins to look and sound like Gene Hackman. The same knowing, smiling eyes, the same gruff voice. Once, while watching a movie, I hear Gene Hackman tell someone to shag ass, and it's as though my dad has been transported to the big screen. Shag ass means to hurry, and the only other person I've ever heard say this is my father. He has large, mitt-like hands, and their Shrek-like size renders certain tasks comical, such as when he struggles to use scissors, or when he reaches to pet his tiny terrier that he calls Princess. He has a tiny bit of shrapnel from the Korean War embedded into the thumb of his right hand, and as children we probe this tiny black pellet with wide-eyed fascination. He is, as my mother says, full of foolishness. In one of my favorite photos of him, he is in a Freddy Krueger hat and sweater, brandishing a pair of rubber knives and giving a hilariously hideous snarl to the camera. As kids, he often tells us about pranks he pulled as a child. When he was a young boy, he and a friend took Limburger cheese, a product whose smell can only be described as fecal, and hid slices in their palms. They went up and down the stairs of their Catholic grade school, quietly greasing the banisters with the stink. When people came down the stairs, they walked away sniffing their hands with disgust. As a little girl, I am enthralled by this prank, and my friends and I reenact it on our last day of school. The cheese is gooey and the smell makes me gag, but I love feeling mischievous like my father. He likes teasing us, his children, most of all. One warm May night, as we were all gathered watching The Incredible Hulk, my dad comes into the living room and looks at us with a grave, stricken face. He tells us that he's just seen a special news report and he has some terrible news. President Reagan has decided children simply aren't learning enough, and he is canceling summer vacation all across the United States. At first, we just roll our eyes at him, but he keeps his face so stone-cold serious we become panicked. We begin pacing the house and shouting. One of us anxiously flips through the channels trying to find the special report. We groan on like this for almost an hour until some of us begin crying and shouting our hatred for stupid President Reagan. My dad finally breaks down and admits that he's only joking. We pile on top of him, half furious, half laughing, and try to punch him with our tiny fists. When we are young, he is gone a lot. He goes on business trips and golf trips, which are often one and the same. He leaves the house in a dark suit, toting a scuffed leather duffel and a rattling bag of clubs. When I kiss his cheek goodbye, my lips come away lightly greased with his aftershave. When he is home for long stretches, it is an event, and the house buzzes nervously with his presence. At dinner, my 6 brothers and my sister and I sit around our large kitchen table, passing plates of shake-and-bake pork chops and spilling milk. My dad shouts out, "Reports!" which means we are to share any interesting events from the day. My mind always goes blank at this, and I feel as if I never have anything worthy of reporting. After dinner, he helps my mother bathe us. We call bath time souping because my dad adores the nonsense words and nicknames that would come out of our mouths as toddlers. When a little one refers to bathing as souping, he makes it part of our permanent lexicon. The same for goosing, which means teeth brushing. He is forever asking us if we have goosed our teeth. The best part of souping is when Dad comes in, a giant bath towel in his hand, and slings one of us inside the towel, then carries us on his back like a hobo sack. He hauls us to our respective rooms and deposits us on the bed with a bounce. We call this geeking, and we all beg to be geeked. When it is my turn, he drapes the rough towel beneath my underarms, then throws me over his broad shoulder. I travel down the long hallway, bumping damply against his broad back, slick as a seal tucked into a papoose. After our baths, he comes into my brother's bedroom and stretches his long frame out on the carpet. We excitedly cluster around him in footed pajamas, shouting for a story. He tells us made-up, ghostly tales that are always designed to teach us a moral. There is the smug Simon Cigarette, who chokes to death on cigarette smoke. Or Reginald Reservoir, the bratty boy who ignores his parents' pleas to never go near the deep reservoir and, of course, meets a terrible fate. And then the favorite, Little Sally Go to Church, about a little girl who doesn't want to go to church and instead wants to stay at home and eat junk food. Sally's lack of piety is always punished by a visit from the Sunday monster, a giant beast who jumps out of nowhere with a horrific roar. My dad roars in his deep baritone, and we all scream with terrified delight, beg him to stop, then quickly beg him to do it again. When I am small, he calls me Josie Lamb, because when I'm around the rowdy swirl of my siblings, I appear shy and quiet, gentle as a lamb. He continues to call me this even after I am fully grown and have become loud and opinionated and decidedly less lamb-like. But he does so ironically, with a glint in his eye. He tears up easily, which seems funny for a man with such a large, commanding presence. But certain songs and movies leave his eyes pink-rimmed and glistening, and when I am growing up, I actually see him cry more times than my mother. On my wedding day, I select Someone to Watch Over Me for our father-daughter dance because it's a song I know he likes. But he refuses to slow dance, and he just keeps shimmying around the floor and making goofy faces. A few bars in, I ask him what exactly is wrong, and he says, "Josie, this music is too sad." Flustered, I go up to the DJ and request that she instead put on Supertramp's The Logical Song, another favorite of my father's. He is thrilled, and in my wedding photos, we are both spinning and laughing, giving high, jubilant kicks. When I'm in my 20s, I chafe at his politics and when I consider his small-town small-mindedness. He's a staunch Republican and extremely conservative, whereas I consider myself very liberal. We have heated arguments at the dinner table that leave us both red-faced and shouting and make my mother flutter nervously around the kitchen. My other siblings never engage with my father in this way, and they find it hilarious the way we shout at each other about Clinton and both Bushes. Sometimes, to gall me, he tapes conservative news articles to the lamp hanging above my place at the table. I come down for breakfast and find Karl Rove's smiling face torn from the paper, dangling in front of me from a piece of Scotch tape. I sleepily look to my father, and he smirks at me over his bowl of Raisin Bran. With the Alzheimer's, the days of political debates and discussions come to an end. There is no longer any real, lasting talk of the present. My father's mind becomes stuck in the past like a wheel that can't quite push over, and he speaks to me about long-ago events as though he is plucking dusty photos from an album in his mind and holding them up to me, saying, "Here, see?" He tells me several times about how his father once gifted him a new baseball glove. He says he loved the glove so much he oiled it every single night. Or he recounts the time he found a dead body on the golf course. He describes how he and a friend were playing on New Year's Day and were the only ones stomping their spiked shoes through the frosted glass, knocking around balls. When my dad rounded a sand trap, he spied the man, gray-faced and frozen, a bottle of whiskey at his side. He talks about his time in the Korean War. about how frightened he was lying on the floor of a cargo plane, traveling further from his Indiana home than he'd ever been in his life. One night in camp, he polished his army boots white as a sort of goofy mini-protest, and he was soundly punished for it by the colonel. And he talks about Lynn, the oldest child and sister I never knew. She died when she was 5 of meningitis. He fingers the tattered prayer card that he still, 38 years later, carries in his wallet, and he tells me in a low, quiet voice how delicate and beautiful her hands were. He talks about her golden hair. I listen to him talk and feel overwhelmed by how much there is about him that I don't know or can't really fathom. His life stretches behind him, full of heartbreaks and triumphs and mysteries that I will never really grasp. And through him, I learn that understanding people and loving them sometimes have very little to do with one another. Now, when I am home visiting, he really likes to give me things. He has always delighted in giving gifts, but now, each time I am there, he gives me funny things, strange bits of odds and ends. He has taken to handing me the smallest of trinkets, the kinds of treasures a small child might hide away in a cigar box. "Here, Josie," he says, "you can take that home with you." And he hands me an old golf tee or a tiny, pretty seed pod that he spied on the ground. A St. Anthony prayer card, old fishing hooks, a tattered National Geographic. I save all of it. I bring it back to New York with me, and I tuck it into jewelry boxes and special drawers, hidden away like clues. Losing someone in this way, the subtle losing piece by piece, is its own unique kind of sadness. It's a mean, cruel kind of grief that I feel could drag me under if I let it. And so I try to focus on the fact that my father is still here with me. He still makes me laugh. He still loves to tell stories, and he still loves to tease. Even now, he still calls me up and holds the phone up to the radio so that when I get back to my apartment, I have a voicemail that is nothing but Rush Limbaugh ranting away. I play back these voicemails, and I picture my dad huddling in the background, struggling to hold in his laughter. Just like the trinkets, I save these garbled voicemails, and I try to focus on the father I still have, on the bright shades of him that remain. I can't ever bring myself to think of when that final dot of color finally fades from sight, completely out of my view. Until then, I steadily train my eye on what I can still see. I take in every last glimpse. Thank you.
Our next reader is Lily Lopate. Is that how you pronounce it? She is a junior at Bryn Mawr College. She has published pieces in Mr. Bellow's Neighborhood as well as this book, and is the editor-in-chief of the Bryn Mawr College newspaper, Mako News, and has won several scholastic writing awards, and is the apple of my eye.
I'm going to take Joanna's lead and stand as well. Thank you. I'll be reading sections from my essay. A relationship of words. I often wonder, when I meet my first real boyfriend, or even years into the future when I'm engaged to my fiancé, how I will describe my father. How will I give my guy a glimpse into our unique relationship? How will I narrate the experience of being a daughter and the influence of having a writer as a father? What liberties will I take in framing him as a character? Who is to know the parts I'll omit, the parts I'll embellish? Would I dare to embark on an accurate portrayal? And how will I know if this guy sitting across from me in a cafe asking about my life story is worth it? Say we date for 2 months, and as we drive on the turnpike to meet my parents, he probes for some family background. He wants stories that showcase how I am a product of my parents. Will I make the effort to reveal the complex narrative of my father and me? Supposing he's a swell guy with a decent IQ, a man I imagine myself to be semi-in love with, I decide to take the gamble. Tell the guy, as my father would say, the truth. But where to begin? The eccentric. Like anyone, my father has his share of idiosyncrasies. I feel it is my duty as his daughter to dispel the illusion that he is an ideal specimen. I take pleasure in revealing to the world his abnormalities and flaws. For instance, he has a disproportionate fear about butter spoiling, which I can only assume derived from childhood. With swift urgency, he is keen to put the butter back in the fridge so that it does not grow rancid. He has a dislike for the rain, and like a little boy will exclaim, "I don't like to get wet." In Paris, Carla Vivari, or Brooklyn, he takes cover under a storefront until the downpour clears. My father chews his tongue. In a state of deep rumination or pensiveness, careful not to bite too hard, he gnaws on the pink saliva muscle at an even rhythm. As he bats spells of boredom at a holiday dinner, or is forced to endure a lecture on his lack of domestic skills, he will recline in his chair so it teeters on the back two legs. Suspended at an angle, he will pull at a section of his cheek near his jowls. Akin to pinching yourself to stay awake, he hopes stretched skin will reinvigorate new brain cells. Summon up strands of tolerance. It's in these moments when the outside viewer believes him to be in deep thought that the scrutinizing daughter knows he is in fact acting out an odd compulsion. Every morning my father does the Times crossword puzzle. It is something of supreme importance to grapple with 5 down and 7 across. This morning ritual is always done with a black ballpoint pen because pencil is too light for his eyesight, he claims. The conversationalist. My father is above all else easy to talk to. He engages you in stimulating conversation, proposes theories and facets about your character, and responds to your stories with playful interest. Mid-sentence, he furrows his brows and a cunning smile forms at his lips. My father, always a proponent of words, aims for a higher level of conversing and believes any interaction can be wielded towards maximum amusement. He is also a grammarian, drilling me about the uses of I and me, neither and nor, and subject clause agreements. When I increased the number of likes I used in my sentences, he mocked, "Do you mean you like arrived at the house, or you arrived at the house?" He was unimpressed when I said the reason for using likes was generational. "Be above your generation," he bellowed. My father is a nonconformist. He never wears jeans because he feels they are ubiquitous. He questions flaunting Abercrombie & Fitch across your breast pockets. Fashion forward or not, these are his principles. Unlike him, I conform, to an extent. I strive for normalcy. He, on the other hand, argues normal is not an option. Is that your highest goal? To strive for normalcy? Attempt to be like everyone else? I worry if I break from the fabric of my generation, I will be too isolated, a castaway on my own island. My dad is far too stubborn to have this social anxiety. At 70, he is a man who's made peace with himself. What's so bad about being alone? Great things can come from learning to live with yourself. I don't know if I'm ready for that lesson in isolation. Myself is not cultivated enough yet to find contentment in my own company. Words have created such an open dialogue between us, he never has to work too hard to pry information out of me. He confesses when his teaching has lost its energy or he struggles to sustain a friendship, and I complain about my fellow 20-somethings and their skittish hesitance to speak a sentence that conveys what they're actually thinking. I expect words to carry meaning, be surprising, embody a certain lyricism, but not everyone is a skilled conversationalist. On boys and self-presentation. Similarly, on the topic of boys, he loves to mock my misjudgments, the cycle of unrequited crushes I had growing up, all of whom I felt I could improve, airheads with potential. Well, Lily, you really know how to pick 'em, he'd say. But he confessed to similar infatuations. In his late 30s, a therapist told him, "Philip, if only you could apply a tiny percentage of your intelligence to your choice of women." So now he advises, have you ever considered a more bookish boy? Maybe one who shares your sense of humor. It's such a radical proposal, I may need another round of airheads before I take it to heart. Our competitive streak. My father and I are slightly competitive. Since he is my encyclopedia, my literary database, I weigh my intelligence against his. We joke that years into the future, we will challenge each other to a trivia game spanning a multitude of subjects, from books to geography, philosophy, and religion, with a pad of paper to keep score. I used to try and forecast the age when my brain would ripen just enough so I could trump him in certain areas. Today, at 19, I know more about Descartes and Gilbert Ryle, TI-84 calculators and computer systems, he says, than he ever did. I'm filled with a giddy sense of victory when I know an answer to a crossword clue about movies, music, or pop culture. Before I acquired my competitive drive, he practiced the art of losing. When I was a little kid, he'd always cheat, so I'd win our games of war and go fish. He'd pretend to cry, wrinkling his cheeks and balling up his fists, praising my cunning card strategy. I'd wipe his fake tears, and he'd tickle me with his long fingers. My dad can transition from confidant to father-knows-best advisor to professor. He is a mentor, but not a friend. He is the coach for whom I aim to excel. I play devil's advocate, asking him, if I wasn't your daughter, would you still think I'm smart? It's a trick question with an impossible answer. His response never lets me see how much his unconditional love may cloud an otherwise critical and biased judgment. You are smart, and you are my daughter. There is a code of respect which prevents us from speaking as equals, and yet we raise awareness about each other's flaws, shortcomings, or deficiencies. Sometimes we agree to disagree, arguing like great debaters, poking holes in each other's logic, and demanding substantiating evidence. My father and his fame. They loved me, Lily. I'm a star, he reports, elated with the success of his recent reading. When my father returns home from a successful writing gig, he is on cloud 9. Always happy to be back in New York, he feels invigorated. When he walks through the door, he encounters real life. I type on my laptop, the cats lounge by the window, my mom folds laundry. It is a lackluster environment full of family members who are not hankering for his autograph. He announces himself at the doorway, beaming in his blue Armani suit. The crowd just ate me up. That's great, honey, my mom will reply in an automated voice as she flips through her calendar and offers him a beer. You are a star, Dad. Shine bright, shine far, I offer sarcastically. Philip, I want to hear more about your trip, but could you take out the garbage? My mom says, walking upstairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I can see my dad's face deflate. These moments are an endorsement of his career. Why should he have to surrender them so quickly to the daily round? He pets his favorite tabby cat on the head, propped on the edge of our kitchen counter, and nudges her delicate ear with his thumb. I know you don't believe it, but it's true. Your dad's a celebrity of sorts. Hey, you're no Justin Timberlake or Rachel McAdams, I say. True, he would agree. I'm just myself. Outside of the tiny world of essay writers, no big deal. His honest, self-deprecating humility always had a way of turning my wave of gloating into guilt. On similarities and differences. I have my father's hands, with long, lean fingers that can stretch a full scale on the piano. I have my father's toes, especially his stubby middle one that is crooked and hides shyly behind the others. Up until the age of 14, I chewed my tongue just like him. We both grasp the air with our hands when we're struggling to express an idea. Our lips move subtly when we type. We both print and kill trees regularly. We justify a fear of the unknown by thinking about the story it will give us to tell. Neither of us pushes moral platitudes. But unlike him, I am more likely to screen a call, less abrupt in ending a phone conversation, less concise in emails, and less decisive when shopping. I do not promise I will never tell white lies. We are both liberal Democrats, New Yorkers, and contemplatives. I am my father, and I am also a very distinct being myself. On small victories and daily disappointments. My dad understands far better than anyone my degrees of discontentment. I often find myself identifying with the Chekhov character Masha in The Seagull, who announces solemnly, "I am in mourning for my life." He listens when I tell him how I feel some essential element in my life is lacking, and he reminds me of Peggy Lee singing "Is That All There Is?" as an account of unmet expectations. I tell him I have a bittersweet mentality I can't seem to shake. He gives me a look with kind eyes and tells me, "That's the trouble with sensitive people. You're always thinking, you're exposed to life. But even in moments of loneliness or emptiness, a sensitive person's best bet is to find amusement in the crevices of discontentment." I ask him if he thinks happiness is a construct. He pulls at a roll of his chin and offers, "I don't believe it's a complete fabrication. You just need to redefine your expectations to better fit a more reasonable ideal." But I don't want to lower my standards. I want to experience the extraordinary. "Yes, Lily, but happiness isn't like a burst of confetti. It's more like a groundhog. You have to entertain the possibility of seeing its shadow, come across it, and let it influence you." I pause, digesting his words. I feel enlightened and displeased with his offering. "Lily, I have to finish some emails." I don't know what to tell you. Find hope in the idea of rare moments of happiness. When I stress about the future and speculate what society will make of me, he tells me there is no sense in prediction. "Why do you always ask me these impossible questions? What makes you think I have the answers? You want a guarantee or a movie trailer for what your life will be like. Enjoy the suspense of not knowing." Still, I push further. "People say just be yourself, but that's not very specific." People. Who are these people, Lily? People employ a vague vocabulary when they themselves don't know. Why be so gullible? I laugh at the thought of fully grown adults bumbling around with neon question marks suspended above their heads. "Maybe I should go out and find myself," I ask wistfully. I hate that expression, find yourself. What a cop-out. Your identity isn't a misplaced glove that you dropped on the subway platform. You never lost yourself to begin with, so what do you expect to find?
Our final reader is Melora Wolff, who is a professor of English and theater arts at Skidmore College. She's published widely in Selma Gundy, Gettysburg Review, New York Times, the Normal School, Southern Review, and is working on a collection of personal essays.
Thank you. I'm going to read from the essay. It's called Masters in This Hall. I'll read some excerpts. It's written largely, although not entirely, in the plural voice from the perspective of New York City schoolgirls in 1972, observing their fathers. And before I read those sections, I just want to add that last month we celebrated my father's 90th birthday, and I'm glad that he's here today to hear this. In history class, Miss Nessel scheduled movies about the Second World War. Several of the fathers had served in one war or other, Miss Nessel said. And although she herself had never seen any of our fathers, except at the parent-teacher meetings, where they sat silently behind the mothers until money was mentioned, she said they were all heroes. Katie said she thought Hillary's father must still be depressed from the war in Korea. She had glimpsed him during her sleepover visits to Hillary's. He lay curled up in a tight ball on a tiny, threadbare love seat beneath a painting of the sea, not moving. He clutched the pages of news about Vietnam inside his fists as he slept. He wouldn't get up. He didn't seem to have a job. Something wasn't right with him, Katie said. A father shouldn't sleep like a homeless man under newspapers on a tiny love seat. We wanted to believe Miss Nessel when she said the fathers were heroes, even though we knew she'd certainly never seen the fathers in the kitchen late at night making peanut butter sandwiches. She had never spied on them spinning the dials around and around on the radio in the dark morning, listening to bursts of music and static. She had never seen them hanging a door poorly on its hinge, or scouring a burned frying pan, or trying to give water to a baby guinea pig with a syringe. She would not have been able to imagine these unlikely acts of heroism, just as we were not able to imagine and never wanted to imagine the fathers with guns, with grenades, with backpacks, and bullets on their belts. We had seen no photographs of the fathers in Germany or in Korea. In our dreams, even the fathers' faces remained shaded under helmets so that we could not see their eyes, and their boy soldier bodies crawled through mud toward some enemy or dozed restlessly and anonymously in shadows on bedrolls, in the backs of covered trucks, in dirt or in trenches. Perhaps the fathers had dreamed of their unborn daughters then, just as we dreamed of our fathers now. Or maybe they dreamed they would never have daughters at all, only sons that would beget more sons that would beget more sons. Maybe they prayed to God they would never have children at all. My father had been in the war in Germany. I knew for a fact that my father did not sleep on a sofa inside the Daily News of Vietnam. But when I stayed up late one night to tell him we had studied the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, the Western Front, invasions, concentration camps, then exterminations, he agreed reluctantly to visit our history class. He arrived in khaki trousers, a wool sweater, and sneakers. Miss Nessel greeted him warmly and offered him a desk chair at the front of the room. "Tell us what you remember," Miss Nessel said encouragingly, and added, "Anything. We know you were a very young man, just a little older than these girls are now." My father folded himself awkwardly into the desk chair and looked at all our faces without saying anything. The air was tense. I feared my father would fail his classroom visit. Then he described the beautiful countryside in Germany. He described long roads unwinding like velvet ribbons and convoys of trucks rolling over the hills in darkness. He described nights without moonlight, an abandoned manor balanced like a jewel on a cliff, and how the men in his unit curled on its marble floor until dawn, breath held and waiting. He described music rising among the trees. He said there were unfamiliar smells wafting over the fields on a wind. He said if we were careful, he would show us an object he had discovered in a camp during the last days of the war, after the liberations. A gold knife with a porcelain handle. We passed this knife carefully around the room and studied the nearly illegible signature that was engraved on the handle, Adolf Hitler. We sat very still. Miss Nessel returned the knife to my father, and I saw she did not touch that signature. My father said he still had dreams about the war, and suddenly I knew this for a fact too, because each night I heard him through the bedroom walls of our city apartment, shouting and moaning like a little boy in his sleep, and I plugged my ears, trying not to listen. He told us all his dreams were in gray, and that sometimes it was very hard to wake up from his dreams. Many girls exchanged a glance, maybe thinking of Hillary's father, still asleep on the threadbare love seat. I stared at my father's sneakers as though I had never seen them before. His laces were untied. On the day of our Christmas assembly, we wore our crisply laundered uniforms and we marched in perfect rank and file beneath the school flag. We could hear the school orchestra already playing Christmas carols, setting the holiday mood in the assembly hall. We entered assembly hall through the 4 open arched doorways and saw the golden light of the hall. The smallest and youngest girls led us into the hall, and we waited the entrance of the fathers. The fathers would follow behind us, marching to their places beneath the balcony, and then we would sing. We could see the fathers standing in the hallway, waiting to march. Every girl tried to glimpse her own father, but they had become one river of blue suits, no man independent of another. As the fathers moved forward, we noted with some amazement that they walked very clumsily, as though they did not know how to march, and that they strayed from formation and bumped into one another. A few times they completely stalled, as though they were in traffic. Metal chairs scraped and clattered, and the fathers finally came to a discombobulated halt. Miss Havey stood at the front of the hall facing the fathers, eyeing them grimly. They quieted down. Her expression remained stern and forgiving. She raised her baton to signal the start of the assembly. The entrance chords reached a crescendo, and in one booming voice that echoed between the walls of portraits, the chorus of fathers sang out, "Masters in this hall, hear ye news today, brought from oversea, and ever I you pray." There was a ripple of laughter from the girls. We had never heard such a strange sound in our own girls' school assembly hall, the sound of 175 fathers singing together, the impossibly thunderous voices of the fathers who had backed away when we were born, afraid of holding us, afraid of dropping us, afraid of teaching daughters, fathers who had carried us and knelt beside us and pressed our first glass of champagne to our lips. Heroes who had lifted us onto the carousel and watched us shout and ride our wooden horses in such harmless cavalry. Fathers who knew everything and nothing about us, who loved us too little and loved us too much. Oracles who became rocks and islands and ghosts. Fathers who closed their doors or flew into the clouds or looked into the cameras or looked away. Men who had all, so far, survived themselves. This is Christ the Lord, masters, be ye glad. Christmas is come in, and no folk should be sad. Noel, 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 sing we clear, holpen are all folk on earth, born is God's Son, so dear. We knew in our bones this was a sound, like the rumbles of a shifting earth, we would never hear again. In our strongest voice, we sang with our fathers. Thank you.